arrest you? I mean, I thought for sure when I was reading that part of the book, I was like, I hope we have this podcast because that segment had been, I've been trying to get the podcast back then. You may not have made it. I mean, you took some action to get yourself out of hot water that I think most Americans, if they read the book and see that, they should be afraid.
Yeah, I mean, it's like the analogy people use is a frog. You know, down in Louisiana, people cook frogs, but if you throw the frog in a pot of hot water, it jumps out.
Yeah.
So you put it in room temperature water, and you gradually, ever so slowly, bring it to a boil, puts it to sleep. Next thing you know, it's cooked. It doesn't know it's cooked. It fell asleep, and so we've kind of gradually developed a tyrannical society, and we're just used to it. I went to Fisk University. Okay, that's a university designed for Black Americans who just were freed from slavery. It was a beautiful school. I was one of the few tall people there. And so, you know, had I not been born around 1965, I would have been there with my Black brothers at Walgreens or whatever it was called, Woolsworth back then. You know, I just hate racism. And I'm driving down the street, you know, in Nashville, Tennessee, have one of three tail lights out, but I have a Black friend in the car. We get like the third degree. I mean, it's like, what is going on here? And then, as you know, I went to NASA with an appointment with media credentials, right? And I asked an Apollo astronaut whether he really, you know, walked on the moon or orbited the moon. I'm thrown out by security guards. And then I've got this tape that two NBC news directors agreed, proved beyond a doubt that they did fake the moon missions. And I'm literally, you know, trying to get the tape to CNN, and I'm surrounded by government agents, and you read the book and given truth serum and all this stuff. It's like we're in, you know, communist China or North Korea that we always hear, you know, bad things about, and yet they're not faking the moon landing. They're not killing their own president, right? You see, so what's going on here? Something has happened to America, and it has been so gradual, bit by bit. And if you believe in God and spirituality, that's the same thing with Satan. He couldn't beat the disciples, so he created a church, right? And that's a scary thing when you see that Satan has infiltrated almost all Christianity, not to the point where people are deliberately doing evil or deliberately spewing false doctrine, but they do have false doctrine, and they become so accustomed to it, they're defending preachers without actually reading the Bible. My grandmother went to church 7 days a week. That's how devout she was. And then when I became a Christian myself, I wanted to study the Bible with her, make sure, you know, her church was teaching correctly. And she said, us such and such religion, we're not into reading the Bible. And I'm like, oh, I thought Christianity was based on the Bible. Her religion is the exact opposite. They discourage people to read the Bible. You just do what the, you know, guy up front tells you to do and believe what he tells you to believe.
Okay.
And that's what's happened to Americans. They assume that the government has their best interest in mind, but we have to understand there's never been one moment in the entire history of the world where the leaders of the world had the people under them their best interest in mind, right? In the last 100 years, there's been more racist genocide in the last 100 years than in the entire span of history before then. So this is a dangerous time when we have people masquerading as honest people, and they're the exact opposite. And as you know from the book, you know, it'd be one thing if they faked the moon landing and didn't kill a single person. Then maybe it's the sinful part of me. I'd be like, oh, that was pretty clever. Good for them, you know?
You're right.
You know, I like puzzles, and one of my favorite movies, I have to admit, is Paper Moon, about this, you know, con man in the 1920s, you know, conning people. And it's not like I think stealing is, you know, not wrong. It is, but it's like, you know, a puzzle solving. You know how clever that was, kind of clever what he did, and you know, when you hear the story about the people digging from the dry cleaner under the ground into the bank vault and getting the gold, and like, oh, that's pretty clever. However, you don't praise them if they slit the throats of 3 guards with wives and children, do you?
Right.
And when I made the movie, A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon, and its follow-up film, I was given $1 million by a man who builds rockets for NASA who knows it's fake. And he thought it was his patriotic duty to expose it. And I was doing the film under the theory it might be true. And when I found that tape that you can see at Sibrel.com in the film, A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon, right on the homepage, of them faking being halfway to the moon, dated 2 days into the flight with a 1-foot model of the Earth and a 3rd track of audio of the CIA telling them to fake a 4-second radio delay.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, oh my gosh, they really did fake the moon landing. How sad is that? And when I had all this money backing me, and this film took 7 years to make, and it was 3.5 years into it that I realized they really did fake it. And I'm like, oh my gosh, how sad is that? And I was, had a lot of information. I was asked not to put in the movie and not disclose until people had passed away. And now that is in the book for the very first time, including my 4-hour interview with the widow of the man who was going to be the first man to walk on the moon. You see, he was a whistleblower. He knew they could barely get into Earth orbit, and the idea of walking on another world in 2 years' time, he saw as being absolutely impossible. He said they needed a decade more, at least, to pull it off. But no one listened to him because the higher ups knew they weren't going to go. They were preparing the contingency to fake it, but had not at that moment in time told the astronauts. And so a few days before he died, he held an impromptu press conference without permission, where he took a bunch of reporters to the top of the rocket, where he hung a lemon the size of a grapefruit and called the thing a piece of junk on national TV. Days later, he's dead. His wife said, when I interviewed her, that on January 26, 1967, he came home from work and said, "Hon, for some strange reason, the CIA is all over the launch pad today inspecting the equipment. I've been here for 3 years, haven't seen the CIA a single time. Why did they show up today? Why are they monkeying around with the equipment today? I wonder why." The very next day, he's dead from faulty equipment. His wife told me he was murdered by the CIA. I'm not saying it, she is. So now we have the federal government taking a third of our labor, a third of our sweat, and instead of giving it to our children and grandmothers, we're giving it to them to not only fake moon missions, to murder people because those CIA agents were paid a salary, which came from our hard labor, right?
Right.
So that's the country we have. This country was founded by the Declaration of Independence that said when any nation becomes destructive of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it. Well, they're murdering their own people. What's the first one? Life. They're killing their own people to cover up their crimes. That's a fact. I'm not saying it. The dead man's relatives are saying it. So the dead man's relatives are saying the CIA killed President Kennedy. The dead man's relatives are saying the man who was going to be the first man to walk on the moon was murdered by the CIA. And it's still officially believed they went to the moon, which means these murderers are at large. You don't have one person killed every month in your neighborhood for 50 years and go, well, it's just one of those things.
Right.
No, you do something about it. The problem is people are spending 40 hours a week watching television and 40 hours a week at work. And then they've got to sleep and do the dry cleaning. And
Right.
there's no time to make the world a better place. And that's what they want.
Right.
They want us distracted. And as you know from one of the clips, which you can see for free at Sibrel.com, I think it's the creepiest one. I mean, you saw the one about the national anthem, right? You saw that one?
I did.
That's so bizarre. It's hard for me to even realize it's true, but it's right there in front of your eyes. What can you say? I don't know how old you are. I see a little gray hair there. But back in our day, right,
Right.
that the TV stopped around 1 a.m. and picked up again at 5 a.m. And then when they went off the air, they would play the national anthem and show pictures of the Statue of Liberty and the Lincoln Memorial and all that stuff. And so they did that in this video that I have is one of the book links. And in the bottom part of the screen, you see the lyrics of the national anthem. Oh, say, can we see by the dawn's early light? And when the lyrics change, it kind of ripples through, kind of like a Venetian blind. But when you slow it down, it's undeniable, hidden subliminally. It says, obey, consume, obey. Trust government God. Government is your God. Do people not notice that when our leaders of our country refer to us, they don't call us people, they don't call us citizens, they don't call us Americans, they call us consumers, because that's what they think of us, right? Voting is irrelevant. Ask Bernie Sanders or Ron Paul if voting matters, because Bernie Sanders got twice as many votes as Clinton did and got half as many delegates.
Right.
So how that's legal, I don't know. I think it's illegal. And then instead of the FBI going after that vote rigging, they go after the person who leaked the information about the vote rigging, who
Exactly.
ended up dead from a robbery where they forgot to take his wallet, you
Mm,
know? And then, just a recent story, we have Boeing,
right.
multi-billion dollar, probably over 10 years, multiple trillions of dollars.
Exactly.
And they had two employees who were pointing out they're deliberately, skipping quality control. Both of them end up dead right before they're about to testify. Now, I remember when I worked for NBC, I covered a story that just seemed shocking to me. A Vanderbilt student at the ATM right across from campus getting out $20, shot in the heart for $20. Imagine what people will do for billions and trillions. You
Right.
see?
Absolutely. And I wanted to go back to that murder just so the listeners to the podcast understand what you have in your book and how far the CIA went to silence those astronauts. They were burned alive.
Yeah.
Alive. I mean, that's that. When I read that, my mind immediately goes back in time and think about all the people who were falsely accused and burned at the stake. And these men, two of them who probably had no idea of why they were caught up in this, because the astronaut put the lemon and he makes the statement, all three had to die. At least that's what I think
Yeah.
they concluded. And they made it the most painful death I think you could inflict on someone.
Yeah. When he held that press conference and basically stood up to tyranny at NASA, all the other astronauts were, applauding him. Hey, 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 you're good for you. But I'm going to stand over here in case you're struck by lightning. They literally said that. They
Right.
said that. They said, we appreciate that. We love you for saying that, but we're going to stand over here in case you're struck by lightning. They made that joke. So you see, had he had an accident, like the two Boeing people, right? A little suspicious. So they killed two other guys with him to make it look more like an accident, like they weren't singling him out after he, blew the whistle on NASA. And that's not the only people that they killed. There's a documentary that Fox did based on my film where they found four other Apollo astronauts and backup crews who died mysteriously within a 24-month period of one another. So you have that plus the three astronauts, you see. So you have seven Apollo astronauts dying within 24 months. Now, I think if there was a McDonald's where seven employees had accidents within 24 months, I think the homicide police would be all over the place
Exactly.
interviewing people until they got to the end of it. And yet that never happened. And then in my book, I don't actually put it in the book, but because the son of this man was still alive, but the eyewitness to the moon landing fraud being filmed was the chief of security at Cannon Air Force Base. And as he's dying, fearing the judgment of God, the first thing he says is that he killed somebody. He wanted to get that off his chest. And his son is like, well, who did you kill? He's like, well, I murdered a coworker. at Cannon Air Force Base. And I verified all this. The sun